Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast. Late stage neoliberal capitalism will destroy us all. My name's Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Magic.
And this week we're gonna this is the first one post Tory victory.
Yes.
Which was demoralising to say the least. I don't know if it was surprising. I don't know if I should be surprised by it, but for some reason I was. So, fight the fatalistic nihilism and try and figure out what we're actually going to, if there's anything we can do, by talking about, instead of focusing on what the right is doing wrong, which is sort of increasingly obvious, it seems like we need to look at what the left is doing wrong. We need to look at what we're doing wrong.
What are we doing? Yeah. In order to address a problem, we do need to take a minute to think about what we could be doing better. One of the things I've been very reluctant to speak about in any depth is my period of working at the Labour Party, which I think was a good indicator that the so-called left was not really functioning very well. So I think I'll base a lot of my thoughts around that. I also think that we can be drawn into a comfortable situation and not realise necessarily this kind of bubble thing that we talk about, really realise what's going on outside of our own echo chamber, our own circle of friends, our own village. So I think that's...
Or it's like, if we do see any of what's outside our own bubbles, it's so shocking that it's just, you just can't even understand how anyone could have come to that conclusion. Like, even I just see like the sun in the supermarket, I'm like, this is an alien world to me at this point.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing that's happening, the way we've kind of got all this information available to us, but it's self-determining. We choose what we read. Yeah. We don't all sit down and watch the same news at 7 o'clock or 10 o'clock every night. We all watch a completely different version of the world.
Yeah, so we've all got our own realities.
Yeah.
And where do we go from here? And I'm starting to feel like the problem is on the left.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I was going to say, and also just like, for all Corbyn's virtues, he's bad at politics.
He's bad at politics.
Bad at playing politics, which Boris is a flipping... that's all he cares about is playing politics. So it's in that way, it's not that surprising, is it, that Boris managed to kind of claw his way into this position? And and then the sort of implications of Cummings being the power behind the throne, I think. But yeah, maybe we record that. We look into that as a later episode.
We've got. I have thought about this as well. They've got Dom Cummings and the Socialist gang. The people that are supposed to love people have Sean Milne. Does anybody know what he does? Does anybody know where he is?
Never even heard the name.
So, yes, he's the Director of Strategy and Communications for the Labour Party, Sean Milne, So, we have a problem.
Yes. And with that, let's... Ivanka, it's the 28th December 2019. Just had Christmas. How's it going?
It's going... How is it going? It's been a challenging couple of months, I would say, on a personal level, on a societal level, though I have got back to Sutivan and I have broccoli growing in the garden, which I'm delighted by.
I'm massively jealous of that fact.
Never succeeded in growing broccoli before. So we arrived sort of in the dark with, you've always got staples like pasta and oil and stuff. And then we went in the garden and picked a broccoli and had it with our dinner. How exciting was that? So yeah, There's good and bad in every day. The house is functioning well. I've really endeavoured very much since coming to this village to be very polite to everybody and very nice to everybody. But I had to tell somebody to stop talking to me the other day. I was like, please stop talking. Stop talking now. I'm walking away. Was basically, please stop talking to me. You're not listening to me. I'm not talking to you anymore. Because we've got a leak, and I contacted the neighbour and asked if I could check if it was coming from their building because it's attached to ours. And he sent a friend who then proceeded to... The conversation started going wrong when he said... Because we had to go into my loft to look at where the water's going. And as we were walking out the loft, he said, do you want to shut the door? And I said, no, it's fine. I'll come back in a minute. Do you want to shut the door? No, it's okay. I'll leave it open now. It might as well air out a bit. I'm just outside here with you. Do you want to shut the door? I was like, just stop talking about my door. It's my door and I want to leave it open. Leave me alone. It was just one of those like, why are you obsessed with my door? Stop telling me what to do. And it all went downhill from there. And it's just an older Croat man, so I maintained polite form of language at all time, didn't swear at all, was very, very polite. And in the end I was just like, please, go away. Go away, I'm not talking to you anymore. That was my first day back in the village.
Lovely.
But yeah, other than that, things are okay. How are you, Michael?
Yeah, all right. The family Christmas experiences. I think I managed to instill a slightly less fraught mode of Christmas present buying in my family.
Nice.
Which 'cause last year I did sort of like basically got everyone's a very slight variation on the same thing and then like a little personalised superficial variety for each one. And it seemed like that's been picked up a little bit this year by other siblings because like even with just 3 or 4 of my siblings now, the house, like on Boxing Day, there was like 17 people in the house kind of thing.
Oh,
wow. And it's not a big space. So my family is very large and growing by the year. I have multiple nieces and nephews now. And yeah, I just got to hang out with baby. So that was good. It's always good.
It is.
Back in London enjoying my personal space and control over my environment and what I eat and so on. So, fine, thanks. Looking forward to... Well, still, like, December's been a bit, again, like, for me, like, I've lost more than one day to emotions. And I'm sort of feeling like I'm sort of behind on my projects and... I was really hoping to have some stuff finished by now, but I'm hoping that I'll find a reinvigorated energy as 2020 begins. So, regarding British politics, I was feeling very angry when the Tories won, like by a lot. And it's just, I sort of did want to record a shouty one, but now that that's just turned to whatever it is, that's kind of acceptance has kicked in. And also, you know, reading about the Stoics, and we can only control. You've got to focus on what you can control.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that's my immediate relationships and things like that. But also, just in a wider sense, like I think we as the left need to look at what we're doing wrong instead of crying about what the right is doing wrong. Because, as you sort of touched on, like, well, I think the problem is like the right has a very coherent message. Because it's quite a sort of simplistic worldview compared to the left, which is a very multifaceted and there's lots of different people and it's inclusive. But that leads to sort of fracturing and sort of like splintering of sort of unity in a way that the right seems relatively immune to.
I've been trying to think about what the right words are. my father used to go on about how the proletariat was very good at arguing amongst itself. That was one of the things he used to bang on about. And in those terms, in those words, the proletariat always lets themselves down because they start fighting with each other and they start competing with each other, whereas there is a ruthlessness. And I think this is what there's something about the end justifying the means, that if you're on a more what you said earlier about Corbyn not being very good at politics, I think if you've got a certain set of values, you're less likely to trample on somebody to get where you need to go or where you think you need to go. Whereas if you have, the people with power or hold power who want to retain that power, there is a ruthlessness and a lack of regard to method that just you can't compete with.
Whether you think I'm sweet or psychotic, I'm nothing if not a persistent kind of guy.
There needs to be some unity in the left, because if you ask people what they actually want on the street, policy-wise, it's very much left-leaning policies in terms of what they want from the state. And if you could just get everyone that agrees that this is, massive inequality is a bad thing, the NHS should be good, like healthcare should be good, welfare state should be good, then there are so many more of us. That's the feature of the 1%, the feature of the sort of Eton elite is that there aren't very many of them. And there's way more of us than them. So why is it so hard for us to unify? And
But I think that's part of, we are taught that way. They are, if you're in charge, the education system, to some extent this is a problem worldwide, but different cultures are more likely to resist or more likely to oppose some sort of policy being inflicted on them. Whereas I think the British education system is one of the, I was going to say one of the worst in the world. I don't think it's very good. It certainly does not rank very highly. And I think by consistently, generation after generation, under-educating people, then their ability to critical think and evaluate disappears. Education isn't culturally valued. I was talking to a neighbour last night who lives a few doors up, and he's in his 60s, and his wife of 42 years died in last spring. And because I'd got used to saying hello to both of them, I asked, and I think we arrived in May, a couple of days after she died. Obviously I was very sorry to hear that, but whenever he walks past, I always paused and have a chat with him. Anyway, I saw him last night, and he obviously hadn't talked to anybody probably all day. And so he gave me a full half an hour rundown of everything in the world, including, he was talking about how many, he was like, oh, you've only got one child, why don't you have another child? Because, and I was like, well, I left it a bit late for having a second child. So, and then he goes, well, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? We must be educated. I mean, my daughter's gone and got a master's and a PhD, and we need everyone to get great education. But then you end up having children late, and it's not as easy as it was. And there's this sort of like acceptance that I think it's fair to say broadly, in a more peasant, less industrialised culture, that education is the way out of everything, and it's enormously valued. Whereas in British culture, it's just not valued, not in the same way.
My experience of school was, being called a swot for doing my homework, doing what I was told. Like, that was too much for most people, like that you actually did what you'd been given. And I was like, well, it's not like I'm going out and doing extra stuff, or I'm just like doing what I thought. I don't want to get in trouble for not doing the things I've been told to do. But that is just, I don't know what the difference, I don't know if it's improved in the last 30, 40 years, but like that was, it was frowned upon to make an effort, to try to do your homework, to do your work, to be interested in learning.
Yeah. And
kinda
it's a weird one. I think it has to come. So yes, I think it's particular to British society, this lack of. Or I see it there where I don't see it anywhere else. Like, you know, even linguistically, if you think about Germans, it's Herr Doctor, Herr Ingenieur, you know, like they add their qualifications into their title, the way you address them. So, and here there's very much this, pride in what your child is studying and what they, you know, how brilliantly they're doing in school and all this kind of stuff. And I do think that's a factor in all this. But I think there's something about this label of socialism that needs to be rebranded. You know, what you were saying about everybody wants these things that socialism offers, but doesn't want to vote for it, because somehow we've been told that if we vote for it, it'll be like the 70s. That's all I ever hear. Why don't we want a Labour government? I remember what it was like in the 70s. Do you?
Well, yeah, George Monbiot talks about this. I've been watching some of his little sort of bits and sound bites and bits and pieces and interviewing. I saw this 10-year-old thing of him talking to Boris Johnson about like carbon offset stuff, emissions in London and stuff, but. What he says the problem is that we did have the crisis, we did have the disaster in 2008 with the financial crisis that very much proved that neoliberalism didn't work. The market would not save us. But there was no new stock. There was nothing else available to replace it. So we just kept ploughing on with this. Because I guess you'd say, the left didn't have an alternative, and still don't. And so it always has to look like a step forward, but we just don't know what the next step is. Well, I think it's radical. I think it's radical left stuff. I think it's universal basic income and sort of I'm on the radical left. Fuck it, like I don't care.
But I think part of that. This is where that crash in 2008 got fixed too quickly. Because nobody wanted to see what would happen if we allowed it to crash. We've seen, we'd seen it before. We'd seen it in the 30s. We know what it looks like when the economy collapses. So, the UK government stepped in and plugged gaps and made sure everybody, bailed out the banks. And then because nobody wanted to see what it was like when people with mass inflation, with people blood on the streets, all that kind of
people flying kites made of money.
So we kind of, in preventing that catastrophe, we prevented change from happening.
Yeah, we let it off the hook. We let neoliberalism off the hook.
It's all right, we'll fix it. We'll pick it up.
And we're just... But there have been consequences, but they've been a lot more insidious, and it's not quite so obvious how they're connected to that that crisis. So Brexit and the slow erosion of the welfare state is all directly connected to that, because there was a price. But we're sort of spreading it out amongst the weakest members of society, whilst letting the stronger ones just carry on as normal.
Yeah, and I think to some extent that includes all of us as well. My life didn't get affected by the financial crash at all.
I wasn't particularly aware of it.
No, so
that's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, that is weird.
Well, I might have been like, why aren't there as many jobs? But isn't that that's like around the time I quit LBI to try and do some stuff. So I just wasn't even.
No, I wasn't paying attention.
Maybe it was like there aren't quite as many jobs, but I
I think it's...
I didn't attribute it to that.
No, but going back to the left thing and what we're doing wrong and why it's wrong. When you mentioned about George Monbiot talking with Boris Johnson about carbon offset and pollution in London and stuff, the thing about somebody like Boris Johnson who wants power, he doesn't mind changing his story.
No.
You know, he's not been consistent. He has defended the environment, been against, you know, like he doesn't care. He wants power over and above any sort of particular principle or value. And what I find frustrating about what people, and I think our electoral systems, we're talking about Boris Johnson instead of, but I think we have to reflect what he's doing well, I think, in order to question what we're doing badly.
Yeah, so to some extent. Yeah.
You know,
like,
so I realise I'm drifting into Boris Johnson, but I'm not trying to bash him. I'm sort of trying to look at him. So our mutual painterly friend told me, and I don't know if I've said this on podcast, that he was in the Albert Hall in the 80s and somebody introduced him to Boris Johnson and said, this is our future Prime Minister. And that is somebody then who has been groomed and helped and been intent on becoming Prime Minister that his whole life. And so he's got there now. And I think our electoral system also allows him to sell a short-term story because he's not painting a vision. He's not painting a beautiful vision of a glorious future where, you know, we all get great education, we get great health care and we get great social care. And it's not a rounded vision of a, you know, equal society where everybody's okay. He's just painting a short-term picture of oven-ready Brexit because he can sell that really quickly. And ultimately, in 4 years, he doesn't need to deliver. I mean, what's his vision beyond that? Does he want to, you know, does your goal of becoming Prime Minister only mean that you need to hang on for 2 years, 4 years, 5 years? Do you need to do 8 years? Like, this is his picture. Whereas somebody like, who told me, who was I reading? The other one, not George Monbiot. Paul Mason talked about the fact that the story that Corbyn was selling was unachievable. You know, green fields for everybody, equality for all. It's like nobody bought into it because nobody believed it was possible. I mean, why don't we believe it's possible? But that's a lack of leadership, I think. Like, if you want to, for whatever Boris is sort of, I don't know, I can't peg him as a leader. So let's put him to one side and let's take Corbyn. Corbyn is not a leader. I would have certainly accepted him as a Prime Minister, without a doubt. Yeah. But he is not a leader, not in the sense of what a leader needs to be able to do, which is to get people to follow them. You need to be able to inspire and you know, set a direction and set a vision and set an aim and all these things that he can't do that. He can't. He's incapable.
So I want to sort of to talk about Corbyn. I think it's really useful to, like, having now done some more research. So the anti-Semitism accusations in the Labour Party basically stemmed from Corbyn trying to being principled over playing politics, I think.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't really want to, you know, I wanted, when we were talking about it in the last episode, I was focused on the politics of accusations of anti-Semitism coming from the other side. But what I hadn't really dug into very much was, like, where that all came from originally, and the fact that there were people, Jewish publications doing, you know, like, there was stuff coming, Labour members, like, stuff coming from the left that started this fire. And sort of looking into it, I should have known this before, but, like, looking into it, basically, there is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, has a definition of anti-Semitism, which has, like, these various bullet points.
Yeah.
And this has been accepted by various countries and various institutions around the world. But there were sort of four that the Labour Party were kind of like, they wanted to sort of qualify, and they wanted to maybe not just accept on face value. And I think this was ultimately because it was stuff about Israel and Palestine, related to Israel, Palestine. Basically, Corbyn wants to stand up for Palestine and doesn't want to fall foul of this, I think what he thinks was a slightly too hard-edged definition of anti-Semitism. So basically, the sort of a sort of Jewish organisation internationally has said, look, this is what you're not allowed to do, and if you do this, then you're being anti-Semitic. Then the Jewish press kind of latched onto this and said, this is an outrage. How can you think how can you think you know more about this than we do? Like Jeremy, etc. Like, how can you reject? We're the ones that know the definition of this. But whilst I think it's like Corbyn wanting to be able to talk about Israel-Palestine, the way this was interpreted by the Jewish press was, no, you want to be able to yell racist, anti-Semitic slurs at us in the street, and as long as we can't prove intent to hurt, then that's okay under your definition of anti-Semitism. So there was this really hard emotional reaction, I think, to what they were doing, which is obviously understandable, people kind of scared. And so these three Jewish papers all kind of put the same headline about what Labour was up to. Then in September, Labour said, OK, we're going to accept this definition. And to be honest, there's a couple in there that I don't even know why you wouldn't accept. It was you're not allowed to compare Israel to Nazi Germany. And you look at it politically and you go, why the hell would you do this? Why? It's political suicide to not accept this definition. Yeah. If nothing else, which is why the Conservatives have no problem doing it, because it's this is a really easy way to appease our Jewish constituents. We just accept this thing, and especially if Labour aren't, because then we can take the moral high ground the whole time. But then what happened? But then it's just the fact that the Jewish press were so worried about this that they would do something that would scupper the Labour Party itself so severely, by having this accusation thrown at them from the people that, you've got to really listen. But then, what happened was after that, the Labour Party actually did end up accepting the definition in September, even though, Corbyn did want to kind of put this whole thing in afterwards, but he got sort of argued down in the end. So it is just the Labour Party now is officially in line with everything else. So all this thing that the Jewish press was initially scared about that's kind of technically dealt with. But then the chief rabbi in November kind of just does this really disingenuous thing, which is just, to me, just seems like an obvious political move to say, oh no, the people are terrified. British Jews are terrified of the Labour Party, which is now based on just kind of the memory of the previous thing that happened. There's nothing behind it. I kind of clicked on this guy a little bit. Ephraim Mervis, and it's not a stretch to think that he's in sort of cahoots with Boris Johnson and people like that, and it's just an absolutely political move to sort of stoke this fire at that particular moment. And one of the 5 reasons that people were they're not sure about Labour is anti-Semitism. The other one's they just don't really like Corbyn's face, and and a couple of other things. But basically, what I couldn't really internalise was that people that I see as having should be kind of unified in terms of values, the sort of Jewish community, the Labour Party. I just felt why would you do this to your own hope of kind of getting into power and actually being able to do things? Why would you hand this to the Tories on a plate? And it's just like standing up in a meeting and breaking ranks kind of thing to me, which I just find hard to understand why someone you must be really scared to do that. But the fact that the sort of press did that, but which I don't think was cynical. I just think they were genuinely worried about it. But then for this rabbi to be able to then jump on it and just kind of, I think, I hope no one gets upset with me for saying it, but he doesn't look like a good guy to me.
I think I looked him up as well, and he looks like there's but this is what we were talking. Well, a couple of things on the whole principle over politics. I do think that you have to pick your fights, and you have to pick your moments to have those fights, whoever you are. And as a leader, you need to understand when is the right time to pick a fight. Yeah. And I think that I often talk about the fact that people don't play enough chess. This is a total absence of strategy and strategic move and anticipating the other side and all that kind of stuff that you need to do, regardless of whether you're managing a team or you're managing you're leader of a political party. You're not really managing a political party, but if you're not managing in a sense that you're not managing the party, you are managing the strategy, the voice, the story that comes out of it. And I think the Labour Party I had this conversation around the referendum time with somebody I know who's British Chinese. We were talking about a mutual friend who was very he was going to vote leave. And I used that argument of, you're standing side by side with racists. Why would you do that? I understand that your goals are not the same as theirs, but you're giving them this. You're being in their gang, and then I spoke to my friend, this guy offline, the British Chinese person, and he was like, he's white male British. He's never actually been afraid. He's never had somebody attack him. He's never had... And I think part of this is a lack of empathy and imagination on the side of Jeremy Corbyn to underestimate the fear that even mildly, anything even veering towards anti-Semitism would cause. I mean, 6 million people were exterminated. I cannot even begin to comprehend how it must feel to be a Jewish person in the world today. And I would totally understand why you would have to go all out to smack down any anti-Semitism. Let's put aside the fact that we should still be allowed to talk about Israel as a separate entity. But because I think number one on one of those things is, it's understanding that Judaism is not the same as Israel. And
I think, but the fact is, Corbyn, I guess I would imagine that Corbyn's thinking, he gets to be in charge. If he's leading the United Kingdom, which has one of the worst histories of colonialism and genocide of all of them.
Yeah.
So whereas Israel, being quite a young country, is sort of like they're being held to a much, much, much higher standard than Britain has ever had to be held to, in a lot of ways, because there's this world stage that just didn't really, it wasn't the same back 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But it's sort of important for the country with one of the worst legacies of doing that to sort of present. I don't even know.
Look, I mean,
we would be listened to if we were talking about this.
One of the arguments that I get, somebody else was talking about him, and I was like, he's a philosopher, not a leader. Philosophically, this is a very interesting conversation, Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. Practically speaking, in terms of day-to-day running a country, you've got people in your own country living well below the poverty line. Deal with that first, then sort out anti-Semitism on a world stage. There is an order of priorities. People being hungry is higher than how the International Association for Holocaust Remembrance has defined anti-Semitism. They're the experts in that. Let's just do what they say and maybe have a philosophical debate with them down the road when none of the people in the UK are starving.
Maybe here is where the left always runs into problems, is because when you're being principled, it can get quite all or nothing. It can get well, I don't want to concede that point because my principles will then be damaged. There will be a hole in my principles. And in a way, that's, I guess, for a politician, that's, you also don't want people to be able to accuse you of hypocrisy because they love that shit as well. Yeah. But I kind of think that being principled, because for me, I just cannot be bothered with politics, the idea of playing politics, because it's a full-time job just to kind of refine what you think are the right principles in life and to discover where you think the problems are, and to just to try and live as a principled person is a constant process of learning and kind of seeing things from new perspectives. And it's a full-time job. And so Jeremy is sort of you can't do that which I would, I don't know if this is generous, but like that's what I imagine Jeremy's world is like. You can't also then be a politician. Like you need to sort of delegate the leadership to someone that can actually knows which things to accept, which things to just kind of like put on the back burner for now in order to get into a position of power.
There's a couple of things in this sort of like how the Labour Party works as well. The Labour Party, the party itself, the party infrastructure, the sort of civil servant equivalents of the Labour Party need to take this on board. The Labour Party of Great Britain is the biggest socialist democratic party in Europe, if not the world. It's a democratic party where the members elect the leader. They vote for the leader. Jeremy Corbyn won the leadership election twice. And the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, who are the ministers, and the head office Labour Party, the structure of the Labour Party, refused to accept that result and constantly worked against it. And again, this is a problem of leadership. Like the first time he won, I was there in between the two leadership elections, basically. Right. More or less, and then the second leadership election was more whilst I was there, but towards the end of my residency. It's like toward the end of my tour of duty. Stint. Let's call it my tour of duty. My attempt to do something useful. And some of the people close to him, I asked them because I never saw him.
Right.
I was acting director of digital.
Right.
I never met him. Fair enough. I met his deputy and I worked relatively closely and delegate. Fair dues, you don't need to meet me. I never met this director of strategy and communications dude. I was only the acting person. Fair enough, don't meet me. What about the actual director of digital? Did you not think she was worth meeting? Is strategy and communication something divorced from digital? It's like, because I don't think it is. So I had a conversation with somebody who's quite close to him. I was like, if he wins this second leadership election, is he actually going to turn up to this head office in London and start leading? And they were like, oh yeah, definitely. Because frankly, if I'd have been, if I'd in his place, I would have done what any, do you remember I definitely said on podcasts that somebody give me the advice when you take over a team, you have to fire a couple of people straight away? Yeah. The Labour Party head office needed a leader to walk in and go, right, this is the vision of the bright new future. Are you with me? If you're not with me, fuck the fuck off, because this is not a time to undermine the leadership of the Labour Party. And that, I think, is another part of the problem. And it's because it was this like talk about factions, that head office. It was like, and talk about chess. It was almost impossible to anticipate like the attacks from all the different sides. Because I've never, I was not on anyone's side, and it was just an absence of, because it's like with, you hear these stories, sorry, I'm telling jumbled things, but they do add up, I promise you. You hear these stories of Steve Jobs walking through the corridors of Apple and going, you're fired. And sort of the management team worked in such a way that they would like hide that person in a cupboard for a period until he forgot that he'd fired them, or they just hid him so he never saw them again. And that's the thing, like a good leader also needs a great management team. It needs people who can help them not fuck up. And as we all know, that is not always straightforward. It can be a challenge. But if your leadership team, the team around you, the civil servant equivalent of the Labour Party aren't helping you, then you are weak. You've got no chance of succeeding. I didn't write
public infighting. How can you this isn't even politics. This is just professionalism.
It's absolutely professionalism. Do you know what? I refused to write a letter of resignation. I refused to put in writing the reasons I resigned from the Labour Party, because I feared it would be leaked to The Guardian by somebody in the Labour Party wanting to have a pop at the Labour Party. Right. It was a fucking joke. And that is a thing that can only come come from privilege. Me personally, as a member of the Labour Party, I actually don't give a shit who the leader is. I really don't. I've never been into that cult of personality. I did vote for Jeremy Corbyn in the second leadership elections, primarily just to go, listen, you fuckers, he's won once, he's going to win again. Now, would you get on board, please? Which, you know, maybe wasn't the wisest. Maybe somebody else would have been more successful. But I literally was like, look, everyone voted for him, stop challenging him, give him a chance. But I don't care. I really, really don't care. And I just care that that I live in a country, or at least part-time live in a country, where people are living in poverty, and that can only change with the change of government.
Yeah, and leadership, and it just makes me think of this. Like, it's like you can be like the head, start a big company. You can have your big company and be a bit like nerdy person who sort of came up with it all, but at a certain point, you sort of need to hire a CEO who will actually do CEO stuff. If you don't want to kind of jump into that role of playing politics, you need someone that can do it. Even if you're kind of like behind the scenes helping them. I guess that's what Dom Cummings has done. He's sort of like nerded his way in round the back, but he's got this kind of mouthpiece that has really been groomed and worked his whole life to become this sort of like faux everyman. Just you can't really throw anything at him because he's so sort of
He's so,
I don't know what even. I mean,
everyone talks about politicians not having principles. So we have this principled politician who's useless, and we have an entirely, completely and utterly unprincipled politician who's bloody brilliant at being a politician.
Yeah.
You know, he's absolutely outstanding.
What we should really have is Boris Johnson in charge and Jeremy Corbyn as his right-hand man behind the scenes.
Yeah, there you go, Boris. You win the election. Why don't you just switch to Labour? I mean, you obviously don't give a shit what the policies are.
It's true, isn't it? He does talk about conservative values a lot, doesn't he? But I just don't think he knows. He doesn't care, does he?
What I'm curious about is what he wants to do next and how long he wants this reign. How long does he need to be Prime Minister for him to have achieved his goal?
Tick it off.
Yeah, and so then he can go, well, I don't know what you do after you've been Prime Minister, but go and fuck the fuck off. It's my new favourite phrase. So we've got a total, we've got the proletariat too busy backstabbing each other. We've got a privileged white man. Maybe the next leader of the Labour Party needs to be somebody who, needs to be female at least, or at least a black man or something, like just somebody, or Jewish, or anybody who's ever in their life had people.
Well, it needs to be Sadiq Khan, right?
Is he put his hand? Is he up for it?
But Sharon's always like, I just want Sadiq to stand for the leadership.
Wonder if that's interesting.
Mayor on mayor violence. We're sort of quite deep in already, but I just want to talk about the ContraPoints thing as another example of splintering left problems. I'll tell you what, like, I had to be in a really dark mood already to commit to reading all this, the details of all the left infighting. And I think the reason that people don't want to engage with this stuff is because it's just horrible. So why would you? Like, why would you go and, like, hunt it down? Why would you hunt down like, when people hear anti-Semitism accusations, if you start digging into it, you just get more and more miserable about the whole thing. So it's understandable that people sort of kind of absorb the surface fact, absorb the surface idea, without ever looking into it any further. And, like, I certainly was guilty of that, if not, you know.
Well, one thing I would add to this whole anti-Semitism thing is that even a whiff of a leader who is being accused of anti-Semitism gives many other people license to be anti-Semitic, and that it really is the nastiness of it all. It's like, you know, you accuse you suddenly, because there definitely, without 100%, are instances in the Labour Party today of people being anti-Semitic arseholes because they sort of think they're allowed. Because they're idiots. It's like... And
I don't think the Jewish press even thought about that when they sort of launched this attack in public. But but just as another example of this, like, and I think kind of highlights the problem the left has from a different perspective, is very sort of successful YouTuber ContraPoints, who's a sort of vocal trans person who's transitioned basically on YouTube, started out sort of pretty much male and then ended up, like, most recently has had some sort of facial surgery to just sort of like take away some of the things that she was a bit more self-conscious about being clocked. This person who has been in the press, in the media a lot for helping to, like, bring a lot of the people that were latching onto the alt-right stuff back into kind of a more understanding, back to sort of just help them appreciate, sort of engage with them on their terms, and actually kind of manage to bring some people back. And this has been a very powerful thing. And certainly I've learnt a lot from this person. This is a trans person who presents female. But what she got in trouble with on Twitter was for sort of complaining about this sort of gender pronoun, like everyone's got to say what their pronoun is now when you come into a room, and just that feeling that they're sort of doing that for my benefit, but actually I would rather that not be the conversation, because it just draws attention to me when I'm just most interested in not being clocked. So got into a lot of trouble for being a bit glib about that on Twitter, but from the sort of gender non-binary people who that's really important to. Like, it's really important to someone that is sort of somewhere in the middle of the spectrum to not be misgendered. So there's a reason for those mechanisms, and the fact that this person was being glib about it got her in a lot of trouble. And then since then, like, sort of after like a very heartfelt apology and, like, just, you know, sort of saying, like, I'm really sorry, I wasn't really thinking about that, to then in the next video brought in someone who's got some used as a voiceover, someone that has been vocal about some certain another trans issue which escapes me right now, has had a heavy-handed and like negative effect on with his views to bring this person his voice. She's been under attack again, and just it's basically like broken ContraPoints. Like, it's like this person that sort of found themselves in the limelight doing these really great YouTube videos and like really kind of opening a lot of eyes, but then sort of one slip up and then like another sort of slightly misjudged thing, even though this is someone that basically is a comedian, in a lot of ways, that they've slightly kind of misjudged a couple of things, have been under so much hateful, like they've received so much bile online as a result of that minor slip up from people that you would think you were in the same community as, that it's really kind of like slowed her down. And that's a thing that the left does in a way that you don't see the right doing. It's like we take down our own for not being perfect.
Yeah. that not being perfect thing is. This is what we were talking. You talked about earlier. Actually, it was pre-recording about how open source does this.
Yeah, well, I think it's very close to that.
Very close to that. It's like the open source community, just the open source desktop community, is so fractured and so quick to accuse each other of being wrong or, like you say, not being perfect, that it just becomes really weak. And I remember there was somebody in a very young person in the Ubuntu community who was really gobby and did a couple of stupid things. And one of the engineers in Canonical and I were talking on IRC, as is our wont. And I was like, we are, if it takes a village to raise a child, this is one of our children. We can't just beat him down because he said something stupid. Let's help him learn, why that's not acceptable, what he did. Let's bring him on a journey. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's educate him. If we know better, let's teach him. And he was like, all right then, Buddha. I was like, but, we can't, just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I need to attack you. And the pronoun thing as a trigger, it's like, I don't know anyone in the world who's not slightly afraid at the moment of the pronoun thing. Are they? It's like, whoa, I don't know how we've had whole conversations about how to use there, never mind this. And I could give a couple of contrapoints to her lack of desire to draw attention to herself, which takes you back to my unwillingness to foray into feminism when I was at university. I was like, stop drawing attention to the fact that I'm a woman, one of 5 women in a class of 90 engineers. But actually, you are one of the 5. You are the only trans person in the room. I'm afraid you can't escape it. So I don't know why we hold each other up to such standards of perfection.
And it's hard to what the classic everyman response to that is, you can't say anything these days. It's like, there's a lot to learn to not kind of step on anyone's toes, and that feels unfair, that feels tiring, and the fact that even a famous trans person can still kind of fall into those traps just goes to show, it is difficult. And maybe it is this splintered bubble reality thing where people, when you are in that bubble, you think, how could anyone not be aware of all this stuff I'm constantly thinking about? How could anyone not understand the pronoun discussion is really, really important because it's all I see in my Facebook feed all the time. There's that. You sort of forget that the stuff that you're an expert in is like other people aren't, and it's new to a lot of people, and everyone's got a different sort of filter on their world that makes it overwhelming, I think, to a lot of people to even sort of start to think about this. But for me, I just find it interesting enough that I want to kind of go into it. And if someone can explain it nicely, which I think ContraPoints was doing really well on trans issues, that...
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of... It's very scary talking about things that you haven't personally experienced. Yeah. I find it scary in that I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't really know how I can learn that I'm wrong unless I say some things out loud and have them questions made. It's like, what was I talking? A friend of mine wrote, in fact, I could highly recommend a book called The Other Mother, which is written by a woman called Jen Brister, who I happen to now be friends with. And she's like friends with me, and I'm friends with her. But she I picked her. So she's part of a lesbian couple, and they've got twin boys. And I picked up the book. I always buy things that my friends make, so I bought a book, and I realised as I was reading it that some part of my brain expected her experience of parenthood to be somehow different to mine, and I didn't really. Saying it out loud, you realise how ridiculous it is. And I was telling another lesbian friend of mine about this. I was going, look, I couldn't believe, I didn't realise that it had this prejudice or this kind of picture in my head of something that was going to be weird and different about being a parent if you're in a lesbian couple versus any. And yeah, there are some specific questions that she would get asked that I wouldn't get asked. But frankly, in every other regard, it's a parenting book. It's a book about the experience of parenthood. And I think you have to, like, I don't know how else to have your prejudices, your knowledge, your lack of knowledge, your ignorance removed, other than confronting it and addressing it and being able to go. I've been reading a book recently, this Don't Touch My Hair, written by a black, so I'm at the beginning of it. So there's a black woman writing it who grew up in Ireland, very white area, with Afro hair. And the whole basis of her conversation about racism is based around hair.
Yeah.
And it's like, my mum bought it and recommended it. But it's like, you don't really think, unless you experience it, how are you gonna know? I don't know how this helps us with the Labour Party, but
no, but like I think we need to, it's just, do you know what? Like my glib response to that is like, people don't know how much it hurts my feelings when someone says "Run, Forrest, run" to me.
Do people say that to you?
Oh yeah, it's a very funny joke. But every so often someone.
At least your name doesn't rhyme with wanker.
Thanks for listening. Sorry about the break, but it sounds like most people are kind of behind on it that I talk to. So I'm sure it isn't the end of the world that there was a couple missing. But thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, if you want to continue to follow our journey into, desperate attempts to make sense of this increasingly incomprehensible world, you can subscribe so that you get a new episode every week. The easiest way is to go to grandpodcast.com and click on the big orange subscribe button up at the top. Where can people find you on the internet, Ivanka?
People can find me at Ivanka on Twitter and sporadically at Grand Podcast on Instagram. And that's it, really. That's where I am.
You can find me at michaelforrestmusic.com, which links through to the other places I exist. I've been streaming on Twitch. If you want to watch me edit the podcast, you now probably can.
Mental.
So, yeah, and thanks to the people that have donated us a bit of money this year. It's not many, but it's just every little bit is encouraging. And if you want to do the same, we've got a Patreon, or there's like a PayPal link if you want, and that's in the podcast description. Just have a scroll through, because I always put a lot of effort into that podcast description.
And thank you very much for any emails that we receive. So, because I didn't realise that Bruce would feel uncomfortable that we addressed him personally on the on the podcast, but I have to say how much I enjoy when we get an email that gives us very detailed feedback. I find it's genuinely really inspiring and motivating to have some conversation, have some dialogue, but also to know that people are actually listening.
Yeah, because it's hard for us to know. We don't get any real-time stats or things. We've got what looks like it could be a spike in downloads, but it could have just been an iOS update that kind of cleared out people's caches or something equally. So we just really don't know.
so we have some figures, but we don't really know what they mean. So anyway. Thousands of downloads. So all feedback welcome. Feedback to hello@grandpodcast.com is great. If you could give us some reviews online, that would also be very helpful, and it's very nice to know when people enjoy it. You can also tell us if you think we're wrong. But
yes. Once again, thanks for listening. See you next time.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.